The door of St. Miriam closed behind Eloan with a sound like a sentence being read aloud. Final. Heavy. The kind of sound a person feels in their teeth. She stood on the threshold longer than she should have. Her fingers wound tight around the strap of a cloth bag that held the whole of her life. 2 changes of clothes, both patched at the elbows. 3 copper coins, thin as autumn leaves. And a handkerchief, its edges frayed soft with age, embroidered in white thread, with 2 letters she had stared at 10,000 times and understood not at all. E.R. 22 years inside those cold stone walls. Narrow bunks, watery porridge, the smell of tallow and old prayer. And now, nothing, no embrace, no blessing. Only Mother Agnes weary in the doorway, saying in that gentle, worn-out voice that Eloan was too old to stay, that the little ones needed the space, that it was time. Time for what, though? That was the question that sat in her chest like a stone, because she did not know where to go. She had never known who her mother was, never had a surname to sign, never belonged to a single soul on this earth. She looked down the dirt road as it bent away between the twisted trees, and she thought which way. Which way does a person go when no direction has ever been theirs to choose? And then she simply walked, because forward was the only direction left. The village around the orphanage was small and poor and forgotten even by the men who came to collect taxes. Low houses of clay and wood, muddy lanes, people with their heads bowed low over their work, bending their whole lives just to earn one more day of it. Eloan walked to the well at the edge of the village and sat on its worn stones, her legs trembling, her stomach pinched with a hunger she had learned long ago to ignore. She pulled a coin from her bag and turned it over in her palm. 3 coins. That was the sum of everything. That was when she heard the women talking. They're hiring up at the castle. Did you hear? 2 of them drawing water, their buckets creaking on the rope. Eloan went still, the way a rabbit goes still. My cousin sent word. The Alpha King's taking on staff, cooks, washerwomen, maids, pays in silver. Silver. The other woman laughed, dry as kindling. And who's fool enough to go work in the kingdom of wolves? You know what they say about that place. Creatures that turn to beasts. People who walk in and never walk out. The king himself, half a demon, locked away in his own castle. Demon or not, silver's silver. And they say he barely shows his face. Stays shut in his chambers for reasons nobody dares whisper. The ones who work there are common folk. Human, like us. Eloan did not move, but every word went into her like a needle, and something in her chest had begun to beat very fast. Castle. Work. Silver. She knew almost nothing of the world of wolves. Only fragments the kind travelers dropped in the tavern, like coins from a torn pocket. Tales of shapeshifters, of alphas and their iron hierarchies, of a black fortress in the mountains called Ashmere, where the feared Alpha King lived behind walls no ordinary person ever crossed. The stories always painted the wolves the same way. Dangerous, savage, unpredictable. But Eloan looked at the 3 thin coins in her palm, and she thought the only thought that mattered. What do I have left to lose? Nothing. That was the answer. Nothing at all. So she stood, and she tucked the coins away, and she crossed to the women at the well. Forgive me. Her voice came out low, uncertain, unused to asking. Do you know where a person would go? To ask for work at the castle. The 2 women turned and looked her up and down, and their faces moved through surprise and settled somewhere near pity. You serious girl, The older one frowned. You look like you haven't got a roof to your name. Elowen felt the heat climb her face. But she lifted her chin anyway, the way she had taught herself to do, in a place that gave a person nothing else to lift. I don't, she said. That's why I need the work. Any work. The women exchanged a glance. Then the older one sighed the way people sigh when they've decided to be kind, against their better judgment. The Grey Raven, in Thornwick Village, half a day east on the road. The castle's head housekeeper will be there tomorrow at dawn, choosing girls. She paused, and her eyes went serious. But listen to me. That castle is no place for anyone who's frightened of shadows. You understand? Elowen nodded. She tightened her grip on the bag until her knuckles ached. Thank you, she said. And she meant it more than the words could hold. She reached the tavern before the sun had fully cleared the hills. There were other women already waiting. 10, maybe 12. Faces caught somewhere between desperate hope and poorly hidden fear. Nobody spoke much. They only waited the way poor people learn to wait patiently and without complaint for the small chance of something better. And then the door opened, and Lady Rowena Thorne walked in, and the whole room seemed to shrink around her. She was tall, broad through the shoulders, black hair pinned into a bun, so flawless it looked carved. Her eyes were the kind that cut a person open and read what was inside without asking permission. She wore authority the way other women wore a shawl easily and without warmth. Good morning. Her voice was firm and utterly without softness. I am Lady Rowena Thorne, head housekeeper of Ashmere. I am here to choose servants for the kitchens and the cleaning wings. If you are chosen, you will have lodging meals and silver. Any disobedience, theft, or improper conduct will see you dismissed at once. Is that understood? The women nodded, silent as stones. Rowena moved among them, examining each one with a butcher's eye. Some she dismissed with a flick of her gaze. Others earned a short nod and a place along the wall. Then she reached Elowen, and Elowen's stomach turned over. Name: Elowen, my lady. Surname: the old shame rose hot and familiar. I have none, my lady. I was raised at the orphanage of St. Miriam. Rowena's eyebrow lifted a fraction. She said nothing. Age: 22. Experience: I worked in the orphanage kitchen from the time I was 12. I can cook, clean, sew, and I learn quickly. Rowena studied her a long moment, and Elowen felt herself being weighed like flour on a scale. You look too thin to carry a heavy pot, the housekeeper said at last. I'm stronger than I look, my lady. Elowen kept her voice level, though her heart was hammering. I promise you that. There was a silence, a long one. Very well. Rowena turned away, already finished with her. You're hired. Present yourself at the castle gates tomorrow at dawn. Bring only what you cannot leave behind. The rest is provided. Elowen stood there blinking, hardly breathing. Because for the first time in her life, someone had said yes. She reached the gates of Ashmere as the sun was only beginning to bleed light across the sky. And she stopped, because the castle was enormous. Larger than anything she had ever imagined a human hand could build. Black towers rose against the pale morning like the fingers of something buried trying to claw its way out of the earth. Stone walls circled the grounds. Dark banners snapped in the wind, each one bearing the sigil of a howling wolf, and the guards on the ramparts watched the road with eyes she could feel from 100 paces off. She was not the only new hire. 5 other women waited at the gate, all of them looking as lost as she felt. A guard led them through across cold courtyards and colder corridors until they came to a side wing where the servants slept. "You bunk here." He gestured at a long room lined with simple beds. "Meals in the kitchen at dawn and at dusk. You don't leave your assigned areas without permission. You don't speak to the court unless you're spoken to first. And above all—" He paused, and his voice hardened into something almost like warning, almost like fear. "You stay away from the royal chambers. The king values his privacy." Elowen swallowed. She hadn't seen him yet. She didn't know if she ever would. But somewhere in that enormous castle behind some door she was forbidden to approach, he was there. And the thought of it turned something strange and cold in her stomach, a thing she had no name for. The first days were brutal. Elowen scrubbed pots until her hands went red and raw and split at the knuckles. She peeled potatoes until her fingers bled. She hauled sacks of flour that weighed nearly what she did, and she carried them across the kitchen with her teeth clenched and her whole body shaking. She worked from before the sun rose to long after it set, and when she finally fell onto her narrow bunk, she slept like something dropped into deep water. But she did not complain, because complaint was a luxury, and she had never been able to afford luxuries. Weeks passed. She learned the rhythm of the place, the names of the other girls, which cook had a temper, and which one would slip her an extra crust when no one was watching. And she began to notice things, strange things, sometimes working near the kitchen windows that looked out over the inner gardens. She would see guards carrying herbs. Not the common kitchen herbs, thyme and sage and rosemary. These were rare, old, plants she half recognized from lessons Mother Agnes had once given back when Elowen was small about the healing arts of the ancients. Willow bark, wormwood, lavender that had been blessed. Once she overheard two of the older maids whispering near the hearth. "It's for the king," one murmured. "They've tried everything. Healers, witches, even mages from across the sea. Nothing works." "The curse is old," said the other. "They say only." And then they saw Elowen standing near, and they fell silent as struck bells. She did not ask. Servants who asked too many questions did not last long, and she had learned that lesson in a harder school than this one. But there was another thing she noticed, a thing about herself, because one afternoon a scullery girl named Prue sliced her hand open on a broken jar deep right across the palm, and the blood came fast and frightened everyone. And Elowen, without thinking, without deciding, took the girl's hand in both of hers and pressed. And a warmth moved through her, a warmth she did not put there. It came up from somewhere beneath her ribs, somewhere older than memory, and it flowed down through her arm and into her palms. And the girl gasped, and when Elowen lifted her hands away, the bleeding had slowed to nothing, and the wound had already begun to close. The kitchen went quiet. "How did you—" Prue started. "I pressed it, that's all." Elowen pulled her hands back into her lap and hid them there. "Cold water and pressure. My Mother Superior taught me. A lie, or half a lie. Because Mother Agnes had taught her pressure, yes, but not the warmth, not the thing that moved through her without asking. Nobody spoke of it again. But that night, lying in the dark, Elowen turned her hands over and stared at them as if they belonged to a stranger. Mother Agnes had told her once on the last morning, holding those same hands in her old spotted ones. "You've always had a healer's touch, child. Since you were small, the fevers you soothed, the little ones who slept when you sat with them. I don't know what you are, but I know you were made to mend things, not to run from them." Eloan had thought it only kindness. An old woman's blessing meant to send a friendless girl into the world with something warm to carry. Now she was not so sure. 3 months. That was how long she had been at Ashmere when the whispers began to change. She caught them at dinner, moving between the guards like a draft under a door. Low voices. Fragments. The chains are ready. May the gods have mercy on him. Clear the upper corridors. Before nightfall. She didn't understand, but the tone of it settled into her bones and would not leave. Because tomorrow, she gathered, was the king's birthday. And nobody spoke of it the way people spoke of a celebration. They spoke of it the way people speak of a storm they have survived before, and know they must survive again. That night, Eloan worked far later than the others. The kitchen had prepared a banquet for the court, whether or not the king would come down to eat it, and someone had to stay behind to clean the mountain of ruin that a feast leaves in its wake. So she stayed, scrubbing, scouring, until her hands ached and her eyes burned, and the last plate was dried and stacked. By the time she finished, it was past midnight, and the castle had gone silent. The deep silence of a place holding its breath. She walked the corridor toward the servants' wing, her feet dragging her whole body, one long, exhausted ache. And then she heard it. A roar. Deep, guttural, distant, but unmistakable and unmistakably wrong. Not the sound of an animal. Not the sound of a man. Something caught between the two and torn apart by the catching. Eloan stopped in the middle of the corridor. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The sound came from above, from the upper floors, from the royal chambers she had been forbidden on her very first day to ever approach. It came again, and this time it was followed by a crash. Something heavy hurled against stone, splintering. She should have turned back. She knew that. She should have run to her bunk and pulled the thin blanket over her head and pretended the way a servant learns to pretend that she had heard nothing at all. But there was something in that sound, because it was not only rage. Underneath the rage, threaded all the way through, it was pain. Enormous, endless pain. The kind of pain that has been carried alone for so long, it has forgotten there was ever another way to carry it. And something in Eloan, something in those hands that warmed without her permission, something older than her fear, hooked on to that sound, like a barb driven deep, and would not let her go. Someone is hurting. She did not decide to move. She simply moved. She climbed the stone stairs toward the upper floors, following the roars and the crashing, and the corridors were empty. The guards who should have patrolled them were gone, everyone, as if the whole floor had been cleared and abandoned on purpose. Later she would understand that it had been. That every year when the thing that lived inside the king rose up to devour him, his most trusted men cleared the halls and left only the fewest, most loyal souls to make certain he did not escape and harm the innocent. But she did not know that yet. She knew only that the air grew heavier with every step, and that something pulled her forward, an urgency she could not name and could not resist. She came to a long corridor lit only by torches guttering on the walls. At the far end, a double door of dark wood stood shut, and behind it the sounds were coming. Eloan approached, slowly, her heart a fist against her throat. She was only a few paces from the door when a roar tore through it so ferocious that her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Terror crashed over her like a wave, and her feet stopped root-bound to the stone, refusing every command she gave them. Inside the room, something went still, Because inside the room, in the middle of an agony, he had endured alone for 32 years the thing that had been. The king lifted its head and scented the air, and it caught something impossible. Willow, wormwood, blessed lavender, and beneath it, threaded through it, unmistakable, to a creature that had spent 3 decades searching for it, the scent of a healer's blood. There was a roar of a different kind then, and the sound of chains, heavy chains snapping all at once like thread. Eloan heard the metal hit the floor. She heard something heavy and fast moving toward her, and then silence. She stood breathing hard, still paralyzed, when she heard a soft click somewhere to her left. A hidden door in the wall swung open, and he was there, right in front of her. Eloan let out a muffled cry and stumbled back a step, because Corvin Ashmere was immense, taller and broader than any man she had ever stood near. Blonde hair dark with sweat plastered to his forehead. His chest bare, the muscles across it twitching and jumping as if something beneath the skin were fighting to get out. But it was not his size that froze her in true terror. It was his condition, because he was trapped between forms. Claws pushed out from his fingertips and retracted over and over as if his body could not decide what it was. His teeth lengthened into fangs and receded and lengthened again. His skin rippled and shuddered like water over something drowning. And his eyes. His eyes burned a gold so bright it looked lit from within, wild and only half a man's. The change would not finish. And the pain of it, the pain of being torn in 2 directions and held there, was written into every straining line of his body. He took a staggering step toward her, and stopped. He scented the air again. His head tilted slow, disbelieving, and those burning golden eyes went wide with a shock that cut straight through the agony. Eloan ran. She spun and bolted down the corridor, panic flooding every limb, her feet finally obeying now that it was almost too late. But he was faster. In 3 strides, he caught her. A vast hand closed around her arm, not cruel, not crushing, but firm as iron, unbreakable. And before she could scream, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all and turned back the way he had come. "No." His voice came out ragged, torn, barely a word. "Don't. Run." He carried her through the hidden door, down a short passage, into a chamber that had been utterly destroyed. Overturned furniture, torn curtains, glass across the floor like frost. He set her on her feet beside the great bed, but he did not let go. One hand kept its hold on her wrist, gentle now, but unwilling, as if he were afraid that the moment he released her, she would dissolve into the air and never have been real at all. And his golden eyes moved over her face with something that was not savagery. It was shock and desperation, and underneath both impossibly something that looked like reverence. "Who are you?" His voice broke on the words. He took a step closer, and the last of the distance between them vanished, and every instinct in Eloan's body screamed at her to pull away. But she didn't, because something in those eyes was not the monster she had heard whispered about in the kitchens. It was loneliness, bottomless, decades-deep loneliness, and a plea silent and enormous that she could not have named, but could not turn away from. Slowly he raised his free hand toward her face. The claws at his fingertips were still half-formed, still terrible. Eloan held her breath, and she waited. She did not move as his fingers, tipped with the ruin of claws, touched her cheek. The touch was astonishingly gentle. It traced the line of her jaw and rose and brushed a strand of dark hair from her eyes. And then it happened. The wolf inside him went silent. The change that had been tearing Corvin Ashmere apart simply stopped. The claws slid back into human fingers. His teeth returned. His ragged breathing eased and slowed. The muscles that had writhed in agony went loose all at once, and he stood before her fully, a man breathing hard, his eyes still gold, but human now, wide and stunned past speaking. "You." His voice shook. "You calmed him. For the first time in—" He couldn't finish. "You calmed him." Elowen did not understand. She opened her mouth to say so, but Corvin did not answer with words. He simply pulled her into him one motion and wrapped his arms around her so tightly she could barely draw breath, and he buried his face in her hair and breathed her in, as if she were the first air he had tasted in years. "You're real," he said more to himself than to her. "You're real." Elowen stood inside that embrace, this enormous, broken, impossible man, holding on to her like a drowning sailor to a spar, and she did not know what to do. She did not know what any of it meant. "Don't go," he said, and his voice dropped low, almost a whisper, almost a prayer. "Please, just don't go. I need to know if this is real, or if I've finally lost my mind." And Elowen, who had never in her whole life been asked to stay by anyone, said the only thing she could. "I won't go." He sat on the edge of the ruined bed, still holding her hand, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "Tell me your name." "Elowen. Elowen." He repeated it slowly, tasting each sound. "Just Elowen." "I grew up in an orphanage." She looked down at their joined hands. "I never had a surname. I never had anyone." Something moved across his golden eyes. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition. "I feel like an orphan, too," he said quietly. "My father died when I was 15. My mother—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. The curse frightened her. She looked at me the way you look at a thing you don't understand and can't love. When I was 17, she left. She never came back. The curse. Elowen said the word gently, the way you touch a bruise. "What is it?" I was silent a long moment, and she watched the war play out behind his eyes, the old, exhausting war between the wanting to tell and the needing to hide, between trust and the armor that trust requires you to set down. At last, he exhaled. "When I was born, a witch named Maeve Blackthorn laid a curse on me." His voice was controlled, but the pain lay under every word like a river under ice. My father had executed her brother years before, accused of using magic against the kingdom. She swore vengeance. And on the day I was born, she came into this castle in front of the entire court, and she cursed me. He looked away into some distance only he could see. "Every year, on the day of my birth, my wolf turns against me. I lose control. I cannot fully change, and I cannot stay a man. I am caught between the two, torn apart from the inside." He closed his eyes. "The pain is like every bone in my body, breaking and setting and breaking again, without end." Elowen's chest ached. "And today is my 32nd birthday," he said. "That's why the chains," she whispered. "My most loyal guards bind me every year before the wolf can take me completely. Because if he does—" He opened his eyes, and something dark and terrible moved in them. "I could kill. I could destroy everything and everyone around me. The curse doesn't only hurt me. It turns me into a thing that hurts." Elowen tightened her fingers around his. "Did the witch say how to break it?" He nodded slowly. She said only the touch of my mate could calm the wolf, and that if I did not find her before I turned 33. His voice failed. He forced it back. The wolf would take me completely. I would lose myself. Forever. 1 year, Eloan thought, and the horror of it went through her cold. He has 1 year. But you, Corvin said, and he turned to face her fully now. You calmed him. For the first time since the curse began, my wolf went still. And the healers I spent years consulting, all of them, said the same thing. That a mate alone would not be enough. That she would need the healing gift. Ancient blood. Old magic running in her veins. He raised his hand and touched her face again, reverent as if she were something sacred and easily broken. And you have it. I can smell it on you. The old blood. It's in you deep, older than you know. I don't know how to use magic, Eloan whispered. I don't know what I am. You don't need to know, he said. You only need to be. And you are. His eyes held hers, gold and steady, and impossibly gentle. You're my salvation. And there it was, the thing she had never had. Not a place, not a name, but something rarer than either. She was needed. Not tolerated, not pitied. Needed by the most powerful man in the realm who was looking at her as if she were the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. When he leaned toward her, Eloan did not pull away. And when his lips touched hers, soft, questioning, asking a permission he did not have to ask, she gave it. The kiss began gentle, almost hesitant, and then it deepened, and there was something desperate in it, as if they had both been waiting a lifetime for this, without ever knowing they were waiting. His hands rose to cradle her face, his fingers threading into her dark hair, and Eloan found herself pressing closer, wanting more, needing more in a way she had never wanted anything. When they finally parted, they were both breathless. I don't understand what you're doing to me, Corvin murmured, his forehead against hers. But I don't want you to stop. Then I won't stop, Eloan said, and surprised herself with the boldness of it. His golden eyes flared. Do you know what you're saying? I know you're suffering, she said softly. I know you're alone. And I know that when I'm near you, something in me recognizes something in you. As if we've been looking for each other. All this time. Without knowing what we were looking for. That, Corvin whispered, is what a mate is. And he kissed her again. And this time there was no hesitation left in either of them. What passed between them that night belonged only to them. The candle guttered low. The wind moved the torn curtains. And for the first time in his life, Corvin Ashmere slept without pain. And for the first time in hers, Eloan slept without being alone. Sleep, he had murmured into her hair, his arms around her like a wall against the whole hard world. I won't let anything hurt you, ever again. And she had believed him. Eloan woke as the first gray light began to seep through the gaps in the heavy curtains. For a moment she lay still, trying to understand where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the sheets too fine. The silence too deep and too warm. None of it felt real. Then she turned her head and she saw him, Corvin Ashmere, asleep beside her. The Alpha King, the most feared man in the realm. The one she had watched only hours ago, being torn apart by a curse older than she was. And now his face was slack with peace. His breathing deep and even, the terrible tension, gone from every line of him. Blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled gold in the dim light. There was something almost unbearably vulnerable in the way he slept, as if for the first time in decades, he had let every defense fall away. And she was there, beside him, in the royal chambers, and reality came down on her like the roof of a burning house. I am a servant. The thought struck with a clarity so sharp it hurt. He is the king, and I am a nameless orphan who scrubs his pots. Elowen sat up slowly, careful of every sound, her heart beginning to race. She looked around the ruined room, the overturned chairs, the shards of glass, the evidence of a violence that felt in the gray morning like something that had happened in another world entirely. I should not be here. The certainty of it was absolute, and it cut. Because she had let herself believe for a few short hours that she could be something more than what she was. And the morning light does not lie the way the dark does. In the dark, she had been his salvation. In the light, she was a girl with 3 copper coins and no name, and a handkerchief with 2 letters she couldn't even read. Even if I have healer's blood, she thought, even if I am his mate, I am still nobody. Still just Elowen. She looked at the small table beside the bed. Her handkerchief lay there where she must have set it down, the frayed square of cloth with its embroidered ER. She reached toward it, and a floorboard creaked somewhere beyond the door, and her nerve broke. If anyone found her here, if a servant spread the story, if the court learned that a kitchen girl had spent the night in the king's bed, she would be destroyed, cast out. Worse. I have to leave. The urgency hit her like cold water. With trembling hands, she slid from the bed and found her simple dress crumpled on the floor and pulled it on in perfect silence. Every movement, measured every breath, held. Corvin did not stir. He slept on, finally deeply at peace. Elowen looked at him one last time, memorizing, because she knew with the certainty of a girl who had never once been allowed to keep a good thing that she would never have this again. The gold of his hair, the strong line of his jaw, the scars on his skin like stories no one had ever asked to hear. Forgive me, she thought, though she could not have said for what. For not being enough, perhaps. For not being brave enough to stay and find out. And her heart broke into pieces she did not know how to gather up. She crossed to the door, opened it inch by careful inch, praying the hinges would hold their silence. And she froze, because Lady Rowena Thorne stood in the corridor, arms crossed over her chest, body squarely blocking the passage, and on her face an expression that turned Elowen's blood to frost. For a long, endless moment, neither of them spoke. They only looked at one another. Elowen, with guilt written into every line of her. Rowena, with a fury so tightly held, it came off her like heat. Then the housekeeper stepped forward, and her voice came low and venomous, each word measured so as not to wake the man sleeping beyond the door. You have made a very grave mistake. Elowen opened her mouth. No sound came out. Lying with the king. The words fell like the crack of a whip. A nameless servant. No family, no lineage, no value of any kind. Rowena leaned closer, and her eyes bored into Elowen's. Do you imagine this means something that he cares? Do you imagine a man like that would ever choose a thing like you over a woman of proper blood? Each word was a blade, and they cut so deep because they were exactly what Elowen already believed. You are nothing. Rowena's voice trembled now with something that was almost more than fury. Less than nothing. Gather what little you have and go, now, before I hand you to the guards for trespassing in the royal chambers. Elowen felt the ground vanish beneath her. Go, Rowena said again, and pointed down the corridor. "Before I change my mind." And Elowen had no choice. With her face wet and her heart in ruins, she turned and she ran. She ran through cold stone corridors and down spiraling stairs and across empty halls lit gray with dawn. She did not go back to the servants' wing for her few belongings. She only ran, her lungs burning, the pain in her chest so sharp she could hardly draw breath. She passed the guards at the gate. They looked at her with mild surprise, but they did not stop her, because she was only a servant, no one of any importance at all. And then she was outside the walls and running down the dirt road that led away from Ashmere, not knowing where she was going, knowing only that she had to disappear before the grief tore her fully apart. It was miles later, when her legs finally gave out, and she stopped gasping in the middle of the empty road, that she understood what she had done. Because the handkerchief, with its 2 embroidered letters, the only thing she owned from the past she had never known, the only thread connecting her to a mother whose face she had never seen. It was still on the table, beside his bed. She had left it behind. Elowen sank to her knees in the middle of the road, and she pressed her hands to her chest, as if she could hold the breaking pieces of herself together by force. And beneath a sky just beginning to pale toward morning, alone as she had always been, and always feared she would always be, she wept until there were no tears left in her to spend. And far behind her, in a ruined room in a black castle, the king slept on, not knowing yet that the bed beside him had gone cold, not knowing yet that his salvation had run, not knowing yet that on a small table waiting to be found lay a frayed square of cloth that carried her scent and her blood, and 2 white letters that would before the end unravel every secret the world had kept from her. E.R. Corvin woke to cold. The first thing his body registered before his eyes even opened was the absence of warmth where a body should have been. And every instinct he owned came awake at once, screaming. He opened his eyes. He turned his head. The bed was empty. For one foolish second he told himself she was still in the room, dressing perhaps, standing at the window, somewhere just out of sight. But the silence was absolute. And her scent, the scent his wolf had known in an instant, the scent of the old healing blood running warm beneath her skin, was already fading from the sheets. Elowen. No answer. I was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. He crossed the ruined chamber in 3 strides, and threw the door open, and found the corridor beyond it empty. No guards, no servants, no dark-haired girl with tired eyes and hands that could quiet the thing that had devoured him for 32 years. Elowen. His voice echoed down the stone and came back to him alone. She's gone. The understanding landed like a blow to the stomach, and the wolf inside him surged up in a wave of desperation, so violent it nearly dropped him to his knees. He felt the claws threaten, felt the gold rise in his eyes, felt the change pull at him from beneath his skin, and this time there was no one there to still it, but he forced himself to breathe. Because she had the healer's blood. Because she had calmed the wolf. Because for the first time in his life he had known peace, and a man who has finally tasted peace does not let it walk out the door without following. He went back into the room, and that was when he saw it. A small square of cloth on the table beside the bed. Corvin crossed to it and picked it up. A handkerchief, old, delicate, its edges gone soft with years of handling, and at its center, stitched in white thread, 2 letters, E.R. He pressed it to his face and breathed in, and her scent exploded through him. Soft, human, and beneath it, threaded all the way through, unmistakable, now that he knew what he was seeking, the old blood. The healing gift carried in her veins the way some people carry a face they've inherited without ever meeting the one who gave it. Corvin closed his fist around the cloth, and something settled in his chest, hard and cold and certain as iron. She's mine, and I will find her. Halvard came within minutes of being summoned. The captain of the guard was a broad, weathered man who had served the Ashmere line since before Corvin could walk, and he arrived already braced for bad news, because bad news was the only kind that came from those chambers the morning after a birthday. Your Majesty. She's gone. Corvin did not turn from the window. The girl who was in my chambers last night. She's gone. I need to find her. Halvard blinked. A girl was, forgive me, Your Majesty. Someone was here last night during the... She calmed the wolf. The silence that followed was total. Halvard had stood in these halls every year of the curse. He had heard the roars through the stone. He had wound the chains himself and unwound them and cleaned what needed cleaning after. And now he looked at his king as if the man had begun speaking a language the captain did not know. That's not possible. For 32 years, Corvin said, and finally turned, and Halvard saw his face. For 32 years I have spent this day being broken apart from the inside. And last night I spent it as a man, because she touched me, and the wolf went quiet. He held up the handkerchief. She has the ancient healer's blood. My wolf knew her. She's my Luna Halvard, and she has run, and I am going to bring her back. Halvard's jaw worked. He was a practical man, and practical men do not easily rearrange the whole shape of the world in the space of a single morning. Your Majesty, the court, your duties, you cannot simply, to the devil with the court. The gold flickered in Corvin's eyes, and Halvard fell silent. The Council of Regents can manage the daily affairs. Lord Bramwell understands the politics better than I ever have. You will hold the castle, and I... He gripped the cloth tighter. I will go after her myself. To find her. Halvard was already thinking like a soldier turning the problem over. What does she look like? And Corvin hesitated. Because how did a man put such a thing into words? Dark hair, dark eyes, small, thin. He stopped. His hand closed harder around the handkerchief. She's the kind of person no one looks at twice. The kind who moves through a room and no one remembers she was there. Except... His voice changed. Except when she's near you, and then it's impossible not to feel her. Halvard understood then, and he understood too the size of the difficulty. Because a girl so ordinary, so invisible that she could work 3 months in a castle and leave barely a name behind, was a girl who could vanish into the world without a trace. She was frightened, Halvard said carefully. Frightened people hide well, Your Majesty. Which is why I need to know where she went, and why she ran. Corvin's eyes hardened. Question every soul in this castle. Find out who saw her last. Someone knows something. Someone always knows something. Halvard bowed and went. It took him 3 hours to return. 3 hours in which Corvin stood in the wreckage of his chambers holding a stranger's handkerchief, like the most precious thing in the kingdom, which he was beginning to understand. When the captain came back, his face was grim. I questioned the servants. Most of them didn't even know who she was, Your Majesty. A girl so quiet, so unremarkable, that after 3 months in these walls, half of them couldn't put a name to her. He paused, but the guards at the gate saw her leave. At dawn, A young girl, dark hair, simple dress, running, weeping. She carried nothing, and no one stopped her. She was a servant, Your Majesty. Halvard's voice was gentle. They had no reason to. Corvin closed his eyes. There's more. Halvard hesitated, and the hesitation told Corvin everything before the words did. Lady Rowena was seen near your chambers this morning, very early, before dawn, and one of the cleaning maids says she heard raised voices in the corridor. She couldn't make out the words, but she saw the girl run from the royal wing in tears, and Lady Rowena standing there, watching her go. Something cold and enormous moved in Corvin's chest. She drove her out. It was not a question. It appears so, Your Majesty. The fury that rose in him then was so vast that the wolf came with it straining up beneath his skin, and it took every year of hard-won control he owned to hold the change at bay. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something very quiet, which was far more frightening than a shout. Bring Lady Rowena to me, now. She came 10 minutes later, escorted by 2 guards, and she came with her chin up and her spine straight, because Rowena Thorne had never in her life been the sort to cower. But Corvin saw the fear behind her eyes. He could smell it. Your Majesty. She curtsied, precise and cold. You summoned me. He did not answer at once. He let the silence stretch, heavy and threatening, and he watched her stand inside it. Where is she? Rowena blinked, feigning confusion, with a skill that told him she had rehearsed it on the walk up the stairs. Who, Your Majesty? Don't. He took a step toward her, and she took one back before she could stop herself. The girl, Elowen. Where is she? I don't know. But her voice wavered. She left, fled. She likely stole something and... Lie to me again. The words came out low, and the walls seemed to lean in to hear them. I dare you. Rowena went white. You drove her out. Your Majesty, she had no right to be there. A servant. In your chambers. I was protecting your reputation. Your dignity. My reputation. Corvin laughed, and there was no humor in it at all. You think I care what the court whispers about who shares my bed? He stepped closer and closer, until Rowena had to tilt her head back to keep her eyes on his. That woman is my mate, he said, each word carved and absolute. She carries the blood of the old healers. She calmed my wolf. She is the one thing in this world keeping me whole. And you? His voice dropped further still. You looked at her, and you saw a servant, and you threw her out into the world alone. And then something in Rowena broke, because the tears that finally came to her eyes were not tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of a humiliation so old and so deep that she had built her whole life around hiding it. She isn't worthy of you. The words tore out of her, all her careful composure gone. A nameless servant, no blood, no name, no worth. How can you choose her when I... She caught herself too late. When you, Corvin repeated, and understanding moved across his face, cold and slow. When I have been here. Her voice shook. Always. Loyal. For years. Waiting. Managing your house, guarding your name, standing at the edge of every room you ever walked into, and you never once. She stopped. Her jaw trembled. I never gave you reason to wait, Rowena. His voice was flat now, final. I never promised you anything. If you mistook my courtesy for something more, that was your error, not mine. She doesn't deserve you. It came out as a cry, tears streaming now, all of it spilling. She doesn't deserve to be Luna. She doesn't deserve enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. You are stripped of your position. Effective this moment. Gather your things and be gone from my castle by sunset. And if you are still here when the sun touches the western wall, you will be carried out by force. Corvin, please, it is your majesty to you. He turned away from her, done. You have until sunset. For a moment she stood there, mouth open, ready to plead. And then something in her face shifted, because the pain gave way to rage. And the humiliation gave way to something older and colder than either. Something that had been waiting coiled her whole life for a reason to strike. She was taken to her chambers under guard. But her mind was already working, already racing far ahead of the guards at her door. She locked herself in. She dismissed the men outside with a curt command they were too accustomed to obeying to question. And she went to her writing desk. She pulled a sheet of blank parchment toward her. She dipped her quill, and her hand still shaking with fury began to write. She did not write to the court. She had no allies there now. She did not write to her family minor, and forgotten and far away. She wrote to the one man in all the realm who had as much to gain as she did from the ruin of Corvin Ashmere. Varric Kilmartin, Alpha of the Southern Lands, ambitious, cruel, and always hunting for the weakness that every powerful man carries hidden somewhere in his armor. Because Rowena knew things. She had run the king's household for a decade. She knew the shape of the curse, the parts of it that only the most trusted guards fully understood. She knew how he lost control every year on the day of his birth. She knew how he had spent his whole life in a desperate secret search for the mate who might save him. And now she knew the last piece. The piece worth a kingdom. She wrote it all. The curse, the birthday, the vulnerability. And then she wrote about the girl, a human servant, ordinary, invisible, but carrying ancient healer's blood, a fact confirmed by the king's own mouth, a fact that made her the single key to the Alpha King's survival. She fled the castle. This morning, Rowena wrote her quill, pressing hard enough to tear the page. She is alone, unprotected, wandering the roads with nothing and no one, a perfect weakness waiting to be taken. He will go after her. He will abandon his throne to search. And when he finds her, she will be the one thing he cannot live without. Take her, and Corvin Ashmere becomes yours to command. When she was finished, she sealed it with wax, and she summoned a messenger she had kept in her private employ for years. A man who owed his living to her family, and had learned long ago to ask no questions. The Southern Lands, she said, to Alpha Varric Kilmartin, by his hand only. Speak of it to no one. She pressed silver into his palm. Your reward will be more than this. Go. He went, and by the time the sun rose fully over the black towers of Ashmere, 2 men were riding out from that castle in opposite directions. One carried a letter meant to destroy a king, and the other was the king himself. Corvin rode out in the plain clothes of a traveler. No armor, no crown, no banner. Only a dark cloak, a good horse, and a frayed handkerchief tucked against his heart. Halvard rode beside him, equally plain, for the captain had refused flatly, and without room for argument, to let his king ride alone into a kingdom that had every reason to want him dead. The court won't like this, Halvard said, as the castle shrank behind them. I don't care. If you don't find her, then in a year I'll be dead anyway. Corvin said it simply, and the simplicity of it was the most frightening thing Halvard had ever heard him say. "The curse will finish me, and then the kingdom is left with no king, no heir. A war of succession that will burn half the realm to ash." He gripped the reins. "So finding her isn't only about me, Halvard. It's about whether this kingdom has any future at all, whether it has a whole man on the throne, or a monster, or nothing." Halvard fell silent, and Corvin lifted the handkerchief once more, and breathed her in, and let the faint, invisible thread of her scent pull him forward down the road. "Hold on, Elowen, I'm coming." She reached a village called Grey Hollow when the sun was already high. It sat on the far borders of the kingdom, tucked among misted hills and forests so dense they seemed to swallow the daylight whole. The kind of place a person goes when a person wants to stop being found. The tavern stood at the center of the village. Elowen pushed the door open and stepped into the dark. The air was thick with stale beer and wood smoke. A few men drank in silence at the tables. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes wiped down glasses with a rag that had long since given up being clean. The woman looked up as Elowen approached. Lost, looking for work. Elowen forced her voice steady. "I can clean, cook, serve. I learn fast." The woman studied her a long moment, took in the wrinkled dress, the tangled hair, the empty hands. "Running from someone." Elowen hesitated, and decided that a lie would be useless, because the truth was written into every line of her. "Yes." The woman nodded, as if she had expected exactly that answer. "I don't care about your past, long as you work honest." She set down her rag. "Greta, I own this place. I can offer you meals a cot in the back, a few coppers a week. That do you?" Relief flooded through Elowen so hard it nearly buckled her knees. "Yes." "Good. Start now." Greta jerked her chin at the tables. "Those men have been dry too long." And so, without ceremony, without a name that mattered, Elowen began again. The days at Grey Hollow blurred into one another, numbing and quiet. And it was there, serving ale to the travelers who stopped on their way through, that she began to learn the world she had stumbled into and then fled. Because travelers talk, and a girl carrying mugs is invisible enough to hear everything. She heard about alphas and betas, about the iron hierarchies inside the packs, about how strength alone decided who ruled and who bowed. She heard about Lunas, the mates chosen by the alpha's women who ruled at their side and were as feared as they were respected. And she heard spoken in the low, reverent voices people save for the things they half believe about the soul bond. That rare, near-mythical thing. Two beings who recognized each other so deeply, so completely, that they became one. They said that when an alpha found his true mate, the whole world could burn to the ground around him, and he would protect her through every flame, no matter the cost. And Elowen, wiping down tables listening, felt something turn over in her chest. Is that what I am to him? Because for a girl raised inside cold stone walls, where love was a word spoken rarely, and magic was not spoken of at all, it was impossible to believe. Wolves that walked as men, curses cast by witches, souls that found each other across the whole width of a kingdom. How could any of it be real? How could a love like that exist? Instant, overwhelming, chosen for you before you ever drew breath. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her, as if she were the answer. And she did not know what to do with the remembering. She was wiping the same table for the third time, lost in it, when the door opened, and a group of travelers came in from the road. She barely glanced up, until one of them 3 cups deep and loose of tongue said something that stopped her hands mid-motion. "They say the Alpha King's gone." Elowen went very still. "Gone." Another man scoffed. "Kings don't just go." This one did. "My cousin works the royal stables. Says the king rode out days ago. Alone. Left his captain in charge, gave a few orders and vanished. The whole court's in a panic. Nobody knows where he went." Elowen forced her hands to move again, forced her face to stay a servant's blank and pleasant nothing. "He left." "Why?" "Maybe he's hunting," a third suggested. "Alphas need territory. Conquest. Maybe he's off carving out more land." "Or a woman," the first man laughed. "You never know with wolves." Elowen carried the empty tray to the back of the tavern. She pressed her spine against the cold wall of the storeroom, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and worked very hard to breathe. He left the throne. He left the throne, and no one knows where he went. "Don't be a fool," she told herself. "He didn't leave for you. Kings don't cross kingdoms for kitchen girls. He left for 100 reasons that have nothing to do with a servant who ran." But her heart, that traitor, that hopeful fool, would not stop pounding. Far to the south, in a fortress of black stone that clawed at a gray sky, Varric Kilmartin read a letter twice and then a third time, and then he began very slowly to smile. I was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, dark hair cropped close, and eyes the pale gray of ice over deep water. He had spent years watching Corvin Ashmere, years planting spies in that castle. Servants and lesser guards and merchants who came and went. Years learning the shape of the man's power and searching patiently for the one crack that would let him break it. He had known about the curse for a long time. He had understood the vulnerability, but one piece had always been missing: how to use it. And now a bitter exiled housekeeper had handed him that piece wrapped in her own wounded pride and sealed in wax. So, Varric set the letter down and looked out over the mountains. "The great Alpha King has a heart after all, and it's walking the roads alone wearing a servant's dress." He had been preparing this for months. His spies had confirmed the curse existed. His men were ready. All he had lacked was the moment. And the girl. "Find her," he said to the captain waiting at his shoulder. "A human, dark hair, ordinary, traveling alone on foot somewhere in the borderlands. She'll be hiding in a village working for coppers, keeping her head down." His smile widened. "The king will lead us to her if we're patient. But I'd rather have her first. A man fights very differently when the thing he loves is already in your hand." The captain bowed and went to give the orders, and Varric Kilmartin turned back to the mountains and let the pleasure of it settle over him slowly, the way a cat settles over a cornered mouse. Because a war would cost him thousands of men and years of blood. But this would cost him almost nothing. One girl, one duel, one weakness exploited at exactly the right moment. And a kingdom would fall into his open hand like ripe fruit. The morning was thick with fog when the tavern door opened and Elowen felt the air change. She was wiping down a table near the hearth. She did not look up at first, so used had she grown to the constant coming and going. But then she felt it. A weight in the air. A charge like the moment before a storm breaks inside a small room. She lifted her eyes, and she froze. Corvin Ashmere stood in the doorway. He wore the plain clothes of a traveler, a dark tunic, worn trousers, a cloak with the hood thrown back, blonde hair disheveled, stubble shadowing his jaw, deep hollows carved beneath his eyes, and the dust of long roads streaked across his skin. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had not truly slept in many nights. But his eyes, those golden eyes, they burned with something so fierce, it stole the breath straight out of her lungs. He saw her, and the whole world stopped. For one endless moment, neither of them moved. She stood with the cleaning cloth still in her hand. He stood with the door still hanging open behind him, and the gray fog curling in around his boots. And then Corvin crossed the room. He did not run. He did not need to. Each step was slow and deliberate, and every soul in that tavern instinctively drew back, feeling the power that rolled off him. Even without armor, even without a crown, even dressed as a common man on a common road, he stopped in front of her. So close she could feel the heat coming off him. So close she could see every line the road had carved into his face, and the tension in his jaw, and the way his hands opened and closed at his sides, as if he were fighting with everything he had not to reach for her. "You," he rasped. His voice was ruined, cracked open. "You're my Luna." The silence in the tavern was total, every drinker still, every eye on them. Elowen felt the tears sting. "Corvin, I know. Don't." He took one more step, and the last inch between them vanished. "Don't run from me again. Don't leave me again." The court. Rowena said, "Rowena is exiled." And there was a cold, quiet satisfaction under the words. "Banished the very day you left. She has no power over you. She never should have had any." Elowen blinked. "I ran because," her voice caught, "because I thought I wasn't enough. That you'd wake up and realize you deserved someone with a name, a lineage. That you only wanted me because you needed me, to survive the curse. I do need you." And the brutal honesty of it stopped her cold. "Yes, I need you to calm the wolf, to break the curse, to live past my next birthday. I won't pretend otherwise." He rested his forehead against hers, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. "But that's not all I feel. It isn't even close." Elowen closed her eyes. "I spent 32 years searching for my mate," he said. 32 years believing it would be only need, only survival, a key that fit a lock, nothing more. And then I found you. And I learned that a mate isn't compatibility. It's recognition. It's looking at one single person in the whole wide world and thinking." His voice broke. "Oh, there you are. Finally, there you are." "Corvin," she whispered. "You are the only thing that matters," he said. And there was so much conviction in it that something in her chest cracked clean down the middle. And then right there, in the middle of a border tavern, in front of a dozen staring strangers, the Alpha King of the Northern Realms dropped to one knee, the most powerful man in the kingdom, kneeling in the sawdust and spilled ale. Before a servant girl with no name. "Come back with me," he said low and clear. "Please, come back with me and be my Luna. Be my mate. Be mine." Elowen looked down at him, at the man who had crossed half a kingdom on her scent alone, who had walked away from a throne to find her, who was kneeling now at her feet asking for something she had never once believed she would be allowed to give. And she understood all at once that there had never been a choice. Not really, because she had been his since that first night, since the first touch, since the first time in her life that someone had looked at her and seen not a thing to be used, but a person to be kept. Yes. The word came out a whisper, but it carried through the silence of the tavern like a bell. Corvin closed his eyes, and the relief that swept across his face was so total that it made her chest ache to see it. He rose in one fluid motion and pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was not gentle. It was desperate and grateful and years too long in coming. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Never run from me again. Promise me." "I promise." She was crying and smiling at once. "But Corvin, what if the court still won't? The court will learn." He cut her off, gentle. "You broke the curse. You saved me. And more than that, you're my mate. They have no choice but to accept you, and I have no intention of giving them one." She nodded, trusting him in a way she had never trusted anyone. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for running, for leaving you searching." He kissed her forehead. "You're here now. That's all that matters." And for one moment, one shining, fragile moment, Eloan let herself believe that the hard part was over, that the story could simply end here, with a king on his knee, and a girl who was finally chosen. She was gathering her few things while Corvin settled the bill with Greta. And that was when the tavern doors burst open. Heavy boots hit the wooden floor. Every soul in the room went rigid, and Eloan turned, and the blood in her veins turned to ice water. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad, dark hair cropped short, and eyes the pale gray of frost eyes that looked as if they could freeze anything they touched. He wore reinforced leather armor plated with dark metal, and there was something in the way he moved, something predatory and calm, as if every step had been calculated to make the person watching afraid. Behind him came more men. 10, 15, all armed, all with the flat, patient eyes of warriors who had seen a great many battles and lost their fear somewhere along the way. Corvin turned slowly, and moved at once to stand between Eloan and the door. And when he spoke, his voice came out low and dangerous and quiet as the moment before a blade falls. "Varric Kilmartin, how very interesting, to find you so far from the southern lands." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only something cold and calculated and cruel. "Corvin Ashmere." He dipped into a shallow, mocking bow. Or should I say, Alpha King, though a king who abandons his throne to chase after a human servant girl hardly deserves the title. Wouldn't you agree? Eloan felt Corvin go rigid beside her, but he did not answer the taunt. He only waited, and Varric walked slowly into the tavern, his men spreading out behind him to block every door, and the last of the drinkers fled into the fog, and even Greta vanished into the back. "I've studied you for years, Corvin," Varric said, almost pleasantly, picking up an abandoned mug and sniffing its contents with distaste. "Years of watching, investigating, looking for the weakness every great man carries. And you were a difficult one. I'll grant you that." He set the mug down. "But then I received a letter from a certain exiled housekeeper. Bitter women make such generous friends." He turned, and his pale gray eyes slid past Corvin to Eloan and held her there, studying her with an interest that made her want to shrink into the floor. "And she told me everything. The curse, the mate, the ancient healer's blood." He tilted his head. "So this is the famous girl, the one who calms the great Alpha King." His gaze moved over her, slow and assessing and dismissive. "I'll admit, I expected something more. Corvin moved, but Varric lifted one hand, lazy, almost bored. Careful. My men have very specific orders. If I give the signal, they take her. And something tells me you'd rather that didn't happen. Corvin stopped. Every muscle in his body strained. The gold rose in his eyes, and Elowin saw the claws begin to push at his fingertips. "If you touch her," he said, and it was more growl than words. "I've no intention of touching her." Varric folded his arms. "I've come to make you an offer instead. So listen carefully, Alpha King, because I'll only say it once." He let the silence stretch. "An alpha duel." The words dropped into the tavern, like stones into still water. Elowin did not fully understand what they meant, but she saw Varric's men straighten. She saw the tension in the room sharpen until it was almost a thing you could touch. "An alpha duel," Corvin repeated, and his voice had gone very low. "You know what you're asking. Perfectly." Varric folded his arms. "The oldest tradition we have. Two alphas fight, until one submits or one dies, and the winner takes everything. Lands, power, titles. All of it passing from the defeated to the victor. Clean, simple, final. And the girl." Corvin's jaw was iron. "Where does she fit into this?" Varric smiled that cold smile again, the one that made Elowin's stomach twist. "She's the incentive. You see, I need to be certain you'll actually appear. So she comes with me. Collateral. And when the duel is done, if you're still breathing, you can have her back." "Never." The word came out as a roar that shook the rafters. The gold blazed in Corvin's eyes, and the claws pushed fully from his fingers. "She goes nowhere with you." Varric made a small gesture, and his men closed in, boxing them from every side, blades sliding half free of their sheaths. "You really want to do this here?" Varric asked, calm as a man discussing the weather. "Fight 15 of my best wolves in a room this size, with her standing behind you. Risk a stray blade finding her in the chaos." He let the question sit. "Or would you rather accept a fair fight, a real chance to kill me, and take her home unharmed?" Corvin went utterly still, and Elowin saw the war rage behind his golden eyes. The instinct to protect her, now, this instant, with tooth and claw. Against the cold arithmetic that a fight in this cramped room could get her killed. She stepped forward. She touched his arm. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Just fight him. Don't let me go with... If I fight here, you could die." His voice cracked. "And that I cannot risk." He turned and took her face in both his hands and forced her to look at him. "Trust me. Please. I will win. I will bring you back. I swear it on everything I am." Elowin's eyes burned, but she nodded. Corvin turned back to Varric, and every word came out drenched in hatred. "I accept, but hear me. If you touch her, if you do one thing beyond keeping her safe, I swear by the old gods there will not be a death slow enough for you." Varric raised his hands in mock peace. "She won't be touched. You have my word as an alpha." He gestured, and two of his men moved toward Elowin. She tried to step back, but they were faster. They caught her arms, not brutal but firm enough that struggle was pointless. "Corvin." She twisted against their grip. He moved on instinct, and a dozen swords answered every point turned toward him at once. "Don't," Varric warned, "or she gets hurt. And we both know you don't want that." Corvin stopped, shaking with restrained fury, his golden eyes never once leaving her as they dragged her toward the door. 3 days, Varric said. The neutral ground between our realms. Sunset on the third day. If you don't come well, I suppose she becomes property of the southern lands. I'll be there. Corvin's voice was a growl from somewhere ancient. And when I am, I'll tear her from your hands and take you apart. Slowly. Varric only smiled. I look forward to watching you try. And then Elowyn was outside in the fog, her heart pounding, tears cold on her face. And the last thing she saw through the tavern door was Corvin, standing motionless, shattered, watching her vanish. The ride to Varric's fortress took 2 hard days. She was kept under constant watch, never alone, always a pair of gray eyes on her. Varric at the front, and never once looked back, as if she were nothing more than a sack of grain lashed across a saddle. But Elowyn did not weep the whole way. Because weeping was a luxury, and she had learned long ago it changed nothing. Instead, she listened. Because a captive who listens is worth more than a captive who cries. And on the first night, camped in a clearing, she caught fragments of the guards talking low around the fire. He's been planning this for months, one muttered, ever since the spies confirmed the curse. The housekeeper's letter only moved the timeline up. He knew the king would go looking for the girl, just didn't know where she'd turn up. Months Elowyn thought, and the cold of it settled into her bones. This was never about Rowena. Rowena was the last thread. Varric had been weaving this net for a year. By the time the fortress appeared on the horizon, black stone clawing at a gray sky, spired towers like rows of teeth. Elowyn had stopped trembling. Something in her had gone quiet and hard and watchful. They put her in a room high in one of the towers, and then they left her alone. Varric came the next morning, without knocking, carrying a tray of bread and water which he set on the table like a courteous host. Sleep well. Elowyn said nothing. She only looked at him with all the loathing she could gather. He sighed and sat crossing his legs comfortable. Still angry. Understandable. But I'd hoped you might in time come to see things more clearly. I will never see anything your way. Her voice came out rough. Corvin will come, and when he does, he'll destroy you. Ah, Corvin. Varric leaned back. Let's talk about him. Do you truly believe he can beat me? I know he can. Even with the curse. She hesitated. Just a breath. And he caught it the way a hawk catches movement in tall grass. Ah, you know about it. Good. Then you also know that in a long fight, a fight I intend to drag out his wolf turns against him. And when that happens. He spread his hands. Well, it becomes very easy to finish what the curse began. He's stronger than you think, perhaps. Varric stood and walked to the window and looked out at his mountains. But strength isn't everything. There's also intelligence, strategy, preparation. And I have studied that man for years. I know exactly how he fights. I know the moment the curse steals his control. He turned. You know I'm not a cruel man without reason. Everything I do, because I believe I am the fitter ruler. Corvin is weak, ruled by a curse, obsessed. He abandoned a throne for a woman. That isn't strength, that's rot. That is love, Elowyn said. Varric looked at her, and for a moment something almost like curiosity crossed his face. Love. You truly believe that, tell me, girl. Are you certain you aren't confusing love with convenience? The man was 1 year from death. Desperate, cornered. And then you appear. The perfect cure. How do you know what he feels is love? And not simply the gratitude of a drowning man for the rope. The word struck somewhere deep, somewhere she had wounded herself already in the gray light of a morning when she'd run. But she lifted her chin. "You're taking advantage of a dying man to steal a crown. And you're standing here trying to convince a prisoner it's philosophy." She held his gaze. "Corvin is a good man. You are only a hungry one. And a hungry man never understands why the fed man won't trade his heart for one more meal." Varek's smile thinned. "You have more spine than you look like you'd have," he said at last. "A shame it's spent on a man who'll be dead within the week." He went to the door. "Think on it, Elowen. When the duel comes, you may find yourself with a choice. Stay with a man who loves you out of need, or consider better options." And he left. And Elowen sat on the narrow bed and let herself at last process everything. "He's right about one thing," she admitted, hating it. "Corvin needs me. Without my blood, the curse kills him on his next birthday. That much is true. But that isn't all there is between us. It can't be. The way he looked at me, the way he knelt in the sawdust in front of a room full of strangers. A man doesn't cross a kingdom on a scent for convenience. But doubt once planted is a stubborn weed, and it does not pull up easily. So Elowen did the only thing that had ever saved her. She got up, and she went to work, because she could not fight 15 armed wolves. But she could watch. She could learn. She could find the one loose stone in a wall that looked solid, and she found it on the second day. His name was Rowan. Young barely more than a boy, one of Varek's lesser guards, and he'd taken a wound in the sparring yard that had gone bad, angry and red and hot to the touch. Elowen saw it when he brought her food, saw the fever glazing his eyes, saw the way he tried to hide the arm and couldn't. "That's infected," she said quietly. "If it isn't drained, you'll lose the arm. Maybe more. The healer's away." Rowan's jaw was tight with fear he was too proud to show. "Won't be back for days." Elowen looked at the door, looked at the boy, looked at her own hands. If she did this, they would know what she was. Fully. Not rumor, not whisper, but proof. And if she didn't, a boy who'd done her no harm would suffer for it. There was no choice. There had never really been a choice with her. Mother Agnes had known it before Elowen did. You were made to mend things, not to run from them. "Give me your arm," she said, "and be quiet." She took his hand in both of hers, and she let the warmth rise, that warmth from somewhere older than memory, and it moved down through her arms and into her palms. And Rowan gasped as the heat of the fever broke and the swelling eased and the wound began cleanly to close. When she lifted her hands away, the boy was staring at his own arm as if it belonged to someone else. "You're," he breathed, "you're one of them, a healer, the old kind." "Yes." She met his eyes. "The kind your alpha wants to use like a key and throw away like a lock. Remember that. When it matters." Rowan said nothing, but something had shifted in his face, and when he left more quietly than he'd come. She healed 2 more over the next days. A guard's crushed finger. An old woman in the kitchens, a servant named Bramble, whose cough had turned to a rattle in her chest that everyone had decided was simply the price of being old and unwanted in a cruel man's house. Bramble wept when the rattle eased. 50 years I've served in this stone tomb," she whispered, gripping Elowen's hand, "and not one soul ever laid a kind hand on me. Not one." She looked at the girl with fierce, wet eyes. "Whatever comes, child, whatever comes, Old Bramble doesn't forget. And Elowyn understood then what she was doing. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was building something. Quietly. In the dark. Stone by stone. In a fortress full of people who had been taught that her kind were monsters. She was showing them one healed wound at a time that the monster in this house wore gray armor and a cold smile. Let him drag the duel out, she thought. Let him think I'm a prize to be won. I am not a prize. I am the crack in his wall he never thought to check. On the third morning, Varric came with a different face. Harder. Set. Today, he said. Sunset. And before we go, understand something. If I win, when I win, you become my Luna. Not by choice, by right of conquest. I'm not a thing to be conquered. In the world of wolves, he said coldly, that is precisely what a Luna is. Property, symbol, power, and you will be mine. Fear tightened in her throat, but she forced her chin up. Then kill me too, because alive I will never be yours. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, or something close to respect. Get ready, he said. We leave in an hour. And as the door closed, Elowyn bowed her head over her joined hands and prayed the only prayer she had. Please, Corvin. Please survive. Please. The arena had been raised on neutral ground, a wide plain ringed by rocky hills where neither king could claim advantage. When Elowyn arrived, her heart nearly stopped, because there were hundreds of wolves. Hundreds. On both sides, forming an enormous circle around a space marked out by ancient standing stones, carved over with runes she could not read. Warriors, nobles, representatives of a dozen smaller packs, all come to witness the thing that could shift the balance of power across the whole kingdom. And at the center of it, waiting, stood Corvin. He wore only dark leather trousers, his chest bare, his blonde hair tied back at the nape. And when his golden eyes found hers, across all that seething crowd, the whole world seemed to fall silent. She saw the pain in them, the desperation, the restrained fury. But underneath all of it, something steadier, something absolute. She tried to run to him. But the guards held her fast and marched her instead to a raised platform where Varric already lounged on a makeshift throne, relaxed, amused, as if he'd come to watch a play. They pressed her down into a chair at its edge, a guard's heavy hand on each of her shoulders, and there they held her forced to watch. Make yourself comfortable, Varric said as they seated her beside him. This should be entertaining. Elowyn said nothing. She only fixed her eyes on Corvin and tried to send him through her gaze alone everything she could not say aloud. I believe in you. Please live. Across the arena, Halvard stood at his king's shoulder, his voice low and urgent. There's still time to refuse, your majesty. We could raise an army, take the fortress, rescue her by... No. Corvin's eyes never left her. This ends here, today, the right way. The curse. I know. He finally looked at his captain, and there was acceptance in it. If the fight goes long, I lose control. Varric is counting on exactly that. I know it, Halvard. He turned back. But she is my Luna, and I will not abandon her. Not to save my own skin. Not for anything. Halvard was quiet a moment. Then he set a hand on the king's bare shoulder. Then fight like you've never fought, and come back to us. I won't die, Corvin said, and there was so much conviction in it that the captain almost believed him. "And I will prove," Corvin thought, looking at her one last time across the crowd, "that she is not my weakness. She is my strength." An elder stepped into the circle, white-haired, robed, carrying a staff carved with symbols older than the kingdoms. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the whole plain, lifted by a magic that made every soul fall silent. "Alphas of North and South, today you face each other in the ancient duel." He turned to Corvin. "Corvin Ashmere, Alpha King. Do you accept the terms?" "I accept." "Steady, ringing. Varric Kilmartin, Alpha of the Southern Lands. Do you accept?" Varric rose, descended from the platform with measured strides, and entered the circle. "I accept." And for the first time, Iloan saw the two men side by side. Both immense. Both built for war. But different. Corvin moved with a natural grace, a confident predator. Varric moved with a cold precision, a strategist who left nothing to chance. The elder raised his staff. "May the moon goddess judge who is worthy." He brought it down. "Begin." Corvin struck first. He crossed the distance in a blur, half-shifting as he moved, claws, bursting out fangs, lengthening eyes blazing gold. The first blow went for Varric's throat, meant to end it in one stroke. But Varric was ready. He slipped aside at the last instant, and Corvin's claws only raked his shoulder, and Varric's answering blow caught the king in the ribs with a force that cracked bone. Corvin snarled, but he did not fall back. He spun and drove his heel into the side of Varric's head, sending him staggering. The crowd roared. The two alphas circled, eyes locked, waiting for the next opening. And then Varric shifted fully, his bisque erupting into dark gray fur bones, rearranging, and where a man had stood, there was now a massive wolf, silver gray in the failing light, with eyes that burned with cruel intelligence. Corvin shifted too, and when his wolf emerged, black as a moonless night, larger, more powerful, golden eyes like fire, the whole arena felt the weight of it. The two wolves crashed together, and the earth shook. Claws tore, fangs sank. Blood darkened the ground as they fought a dance as old as their kind. Iloan watched with her heart in her throat, her hands clenched so hard her nails cut her palms. Please, please, please. The fight was brutal. Corvin was stronger, faster. But Varric was cunning. Every time the king pressed for the kill, Varric slipped away, struck at a weak point, drew more blood. And as the minutes stretched on, Iloan saw it begin. Corvin was slowing. Not much, but enough. His shifts began to falter. Not fully man, not fully wolf, but something in between. And the pain of it showed in every movement. No. Iloan's whole body went cold. No, not now. Not when he's so close. Varric saw it too. She watched the satisfaction flare in those pale eyes. He began to press hard, attacking without pause, forcing Corvin to defend and defend and defend. It's exactly what he planned, Iloan realized. Drag it out, wear him down, wait for the curse to surface. And then it happened. Corvin roared, a sound half man, half beast, torn straight out of agony. And his shift failed completely. He caught between forms, his body twisting claws, bursting, and retracting bones, cracking in the wrong directions. The curse was taking him. Varric seized the moment. He lunged, slammed Corvin down, and his fangs closed around the king's throat, pressing, choking. The crowd fell silent, because everyone knew what it meant. The duel was ending. Iloan surged to her feet, tearing free of the hands that held her, and she screamed with everything left in her body. Corvin! The shout split the silence like thunder, and something impossible happened. Corvin stopped fighting the shift, because he had heard her. Above the roar of the crowd, above the pounding of his own blood, above the wolf tearing him apart from the inside, he had heard her voice. And instead of fighting the change, he closed his eyes, even with Varek's fangs at his throat. And he focused, not on the wolf, not on the pain, on her. He remembered her touch that first night, the way she had quieted the wolf with a single brush of her fingers, the way she had looked at him not as a king, not as a monster, but as a man worth staying for. And then, for the first time in 32 years, Corvin did not fight the wolf. He accepted it. He stopped trying to force it down, stopped warring with the thing the curse had made of him, and instead, he opened his arms to it and made it his own. And the change that had always torn him apart now flowed through him, smooth and whole and right. Man and wolf no longer at war, fused, in harmony, the way it was always meant to be. And when Corvin opened his eyes again, they burned with a power no alpha in that arena had ever seen. He roared, and the ground shook, and every wolf present bowed its head on instinct, and he hurled Varek off him with a force that sent the gray wolf tumbling yards across the dirt. Varek scrambled up, stunned, and when he tried to rise, Corvin was already on him. What came next was devastating, because Corvin attacked with a ferocity that bordered on savage, and yet he never once lost control. Every strike precise, every bite calculated. Varek tried to defend, tried to use everything he'd learned in years of studying his enemy. But he couldn't, because he had studied a broken man, and the man before him was not broken anymore. He was whole. In less than 5 minutes, Varek was on the ground, bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely breathing, and Corvin stood over him, jaws closing around his throat, pressing, not enough to kill, enough to make it clear he could. And then he waited. The elder approached staff, thudding against the earth. "Alpha Varek Kilmartin, do you submit?" Varek was silent a long moment, pride warring with survival. But when Corvin pressed a fraction harder, when the taste of his own blood filled his mouth, Varek yielded. He bared his throat completely, the ancient gesture of surrender, and whispered the word that sealed his fate. "I submit." But Varek Kilmartin was not a man who accepted a fair defeat, because as Corvin began to release him as the black wolf turned toward the platform, where Elowin stood, Varek's hand slid toward his belt, toward a blade, coated dark, with something that gleamed wrong in the dying light, and he gathered himself for one last treacherous strike at the king's exposed flank. "Now," a voice cried. It was not Elowin's, it was Rowan's, because the young guard she had healed the boy, whose arm she had saved, had been standing at the edge of Varek's own line, and he had seen the blade, and he had made a choice. And with him came the others. The guard with the finger she had mended. 2 more who had heard the whispers. They broke from Varek's ranks and seized his arm, and the poisoned blade fell from his fingers into the dirt. "Traitors!" Varek snarled. "No," Rowan said, breathing hard, gripping his former alpha's wrist. "She healed us. She's the old blood, the kind you told us were monsters." He looked at the knife in the dirt. The monster was never her. And in that moment, the whole of Varek's power broke, not by the king's teeth, but by the loyalty of the very people he had ruled through fear. The people Elowin had reached one quiet act of mercy at a time. The elder lifted his staff, and his voice rang across the plain. Corvin Ashmere is declared the victor. By right of conquest, all lands, powers, and titles of Varric Kilmartin now pass to the Alpha King of Ashmere. And let it be witnessed. He looked at the guards, still holding Varric, that his own house turned from him. There is no greater judgment than that. But Corvin did not care about lands. He did not care about titles. He shifted back to a man covered in blood, his own and Varric's, and he turned golden eyes sweeping the crowd until they found her. Elowen, shaking, weeping, but alive, alive and his. He crossed the arena in long strides, ignoring the pain of his wounds, ignoring the roar of the crowd. And when he reached her, he simply pulled her into his arms and held her as if he would never again let go. "You won!" she sobbed into his chest. "We won," he murmured into her hair. "You built the door, Elowen. I only walked through it." He pulled back, cradling her face in his bloodied hands. "I love you. Do you hear me? Not because you break the curse. Not because I need you. But because you are the only person in this world who ever looked at me and saw a man worth saving. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it, if you'll let me." And she kissed him. Right there, surrounded by blood and glory and hundreds of witnesses, Elowen kissed her king with everything she had. And when they parted, the crowd's roar shook the earth. The claiming took place that same night on the neutral ground beneath a sky drowned in stars. Hundreds of wolves formed a sacred circle. The elder led the rite, the ancient words rolling out into the dark. "Corvin Ashmere, Supreme Alpha King of the Northern Realms and now the South. Do you claim this woman as your Luna? I claim her." He held her hand, as if it were the last solid thing in a shifting world. "And you?" The elder turned to Elowen, and he paused, and his old eyes moved over her with something that was not ceremony, but recognition, as if he saw in her something the whole world had spent centuries trying to forget. When he spoke again, there was reverence in his voice. "Healer of ancient blood, tamer of wolves, do you accept this man as your alpha, your mate?" Elowen looked at Corvin, at the man who had crossed half a kingdom on nothing but her scent, who had fought a curse and a conqueror to reach her, who was looking at her now as if she were the only thing that had ever mattered. "I accept." The elder smiled, the first true smile he had shown. "Then let it be sealed, beneath the full moon, witnessed by the ancestors." Corvin leaned in until his lips brushed her neck exactly where her pulse beat hard, and then before them all he bit. It was not brutal. It was reverent. The claiming mark, the final seal of the bond between Alpha and Luna. Elowen gasped at the sharp, bright pain that gave way to a heat that spread through her whole body like liquid fire, and she felt something shift at a level deeper than flesh, felt the bond between them lock into place in a way that could never again be broken. When he drew back, the mark on her neck glowed faintly under the moon, permanent, visible, declaring to the whole world that she belonged to him, as surely as he belonged to her. "Now you are my Luna," he said, touching the mark with something close to worship. "I always was," she answered. 3 months later, Elowen stood in the gardens of Ashmere and watched her husband train with his guards in the courtyard below. So much had changed. Varric had been stripped of everything and sent into exile. His lands folded into Corvin's, his wolves given the choice to submit or leave. Most had submitted, Rowan among them, though he now wore the colors of Ashmere and had been given a pillars in the king's own guard, a reward. Corvin insisted upon the moment he learned the whole of what the boy had done. Bramble had come north too, and now ruled the castle kitchens with an iron kindness, and never once let anyone forget who had first laid a gentle hand on her. Lady Rowena was never seen again. Some said she'd fled to distant lands. Eowyn did not spend her thoughts on the woman. Because bitterness, she had learned, is a wound you keep open with your own hand, and she had chosen instead to let it close. And the curse was fading. Not gone, the healers said. There would be a few years yet with Eowyn at his side. But in the last month, when there should have been pain, there had been only peace, and Eowyn had learned other things. About who she was. Because she had thrown herself into the old records, the histories the kingdom had spent generations suppressing, and there at last she had found the truth of the curse, and of herself. Maeve Blackthorn, the witch who had cursed the king. She had not been only vengeful, she had been prophetic. Because Maeve had known something the whole kingdom had chosen to forget. That the old healers, the ones with the ancient blood, were being hunted, persecuted, killed, burned out of the world by people who feared what they did not understand. And so Maeve had cast a curse that could only be broken by a healer of that very blood. She had bound the survival of the king, the most powerful man in the realm, to the survival of the most hunted people in it. She had made it so that one day, to save their king, the kingdom would be forced to value the very souls it had spent centuries destroying. It was a brutal lesson, and it was a merciful one. You kill the healers out of fear, the curse said. But the day will come when your king kneels before one begging her to live. And then you will have to choose your pride or your salvation. Maeve had taken her revenge, but she had also left a legacy of change. Because now, the healers who had hidden for generations were called openly to the castle. Witches offered their gifts without fear of the fire, and ancient knowledge so long buried came back into the light. And it was that very knowledge that let Eowyn find the last piece, the oldest piece, the one that was only ever about her. She found it on a quiet afternoon in a record so old the ink had gone brown as dried blood. A name, a lineage, written beside a small drawing of 2 letters worked in white thread on a frayed square of cloth. E.R. Eowyn Ravenwood. She sat very still for a long moment, holding the handkerchief that Corvin had carried across a kingdom and pressed back into her hands the night of the claiming. Ravenwood, because her mother had a name, and her mother's name was Lyanna Ravenwood, and Lyanna Ravenwood had been one of the most powerful healers of her generation. And now, at last, Eowyn understood why she had been left at an orphanage door. Because Lyanna had not abandoned her out of a lack of love. She had abandoned her to keep her alive. The records told it in fragments, but the fragments made a whole. When Eowyn was born, Lyanna had known her daughter carried the same gift, stronger even, and the hunters had been closing in. So Lyanna had done the only thing a mother could do. On a storm-black night, she had wrapped her infant daughter in a blanket, embroidered a handkerchief with 2 small letters, so that the child might one day know her name, and left her on the steps of St. Miriam. And then she had run in the other direction, drawing the hunters away, leading them far from the one thing she loved most in all the world. To save her daughter, Lyanna had given up the chance to ever hold her again. Elowen wept then, not the tears of a girl who had been abandoned, but the tears of a woman who finally understood that she had been from her very first breath so fiercely loved that her mother had walked into the dark alone rather than let the world take her. She did not stop searching there, because she had to know the end of it, whether Lyanna had lived, whether some faint hope remained of finding her. And she found the answer, and the answer was a grave. In a village far to the west, beneath a rowan tree, the healers had helped her locate the place where Lyanna Ravenwood was laid to rest. She had died years ago, hunted to the last, but she had died free, and she had died knowing her daughter was safe. And there was one more thing. A letter, left in the keeping of an old healer who had promised decades before to hold it until a girl with the Ravenwood gift came asking. Elowen read it beneath the rowan tree, with Corvin standing quiet at her side, his hand warm on her shoulder. Her mother's words were few, but they were enough. If you are reading this, then you lived. And if you lived, then everything was worth it. I could not keep you, but I could give you the world instead of me. Whatever they told you that you were my daughter, hear the truth from the only one who has the right to tell it. You were not left because you were unwanted. You were hidden because you were treasured. You were born to heal, not to run. Go now and mend what the world has broken. And know that in every good thing you do am there. Elowen folded the letter against her heart, and she understood at last the whole shape of the love that had made her. The love that gives everything and asks for nothing. The love that would rather walk into the dark alone than let the light it loves be extinguished. The same love she realized that had made her heal a stranger's arm in a cruel man's fortress when running would have been safer. The same love that had made a king kneel in the sawdust before a girl with no name. Because that is what love is. It is not need. It is not convenience. It is the choice to see another soul fully and to give yourself for it, and to ask nothing in return but that it live. My Luna, Corvin's voice from the courtyard below on an ordinary golden afternoon. He was sweaty from training and grinning up at her in a way that was only ever for her. Come down. I need you to see something. Elowen laughed and shook her head and went down the steps toward him anyway. Because she always would. And when he pulled her into his arms, not caring that he was sweaty, not caring that the whole guard was watching, and kissed her, as if he had been waiting an eternity to do it, Elowen knew with a certainty that no morning light would ever again undo that she was home. Not in the castle, not in the crown, not in the title of Luna that the whole kingdom now spoke with reverence, but here, in his arms, chosen, seen, and finally, after a whole life of being no one to anyone known, she had opened a house of healing in the eastern wing of Ashmere. Its doors stood open to any soul who came seeking help, healer, or hunted wolf, or human highborn, or nameless. Above its threshold, carved in stone, were two words that had once been the shape of a curse, and were now the shape of a promise. Be seen. Because her mother had given her a name, and her king had given her a home. But Elowen had given herself the truest thing of all. She had become the person she had needed on that first cold morning when she'd stood alone on an orphanage step with 3 copper coins and no direction, and no one in all the world to tell her which way to go. She had become the hand that reaches back, the door that stays open, the one who stays. And somewhere beneath a rowan tree, a mother rested easy at last.